The stray cat kept scratching the fence. Then a stranger smashed the fence and screamed. You've surely heard of disastrous misunderstandings, but could a stray cat's seemingly destructive act and a neighbor's furious outburst unveil a shocking secret crying out for help? Let's delve into the surprising story of Mrs. Agnes Mr. Miller and the faint cries behind a shattered fence. Don't forget to subscribe, like, and ring the notification bell to follow this touching journey. Emociones its entirety. Get lost, you cat, stop bothering me. The angry shout, full of annoyance and threat, tore through the tranquility of Linden Street on a sunny Tuesday afternoon. It was immediately followed by a harsh crash and the sharp, jarring sound of splintering wood. Mrs. Agnes Periwinkle, who was meticulously tending to her potted geraniums on the porch, jumped. The small shears slipped from her liver-spotted hand, clattering onto the wooden floorboards with a metallic clang. Her heart, long accustomed to the steady rhythm of old age, suddenly felt as if squeezed, then began to pound as if trying to leap from her chest. Where had that horrifying sound come from? So close, right at her front gate, she hurried out her 70-year-old legs, a little unsteady. The sight before her was shocking. Her classic white wooden gate leading into her small garden, her little pride and joy, was now a pathetic ruin. One hinge was torn from the post, several wooden slats were broken and shattered. Standing amidst the chaos was Mr. Miller, the new neighbor, who had moved into the house across the street a few weeks ago. His face was flushed, his chest heaved, and one foot still seemed poised as if he had just delivered a powerful kick. The stray orange cat she sometimes saw lazard around had vanished. Initial fear quickly gave way to a simmering anger. Mrs. Agnes took a deep breath, trying to keep her voice from trembling. "Mr. Miller, what on earth have you done?" Mr. Miller turned, his angry expression softening slightly when he saw Mrs. Agnes. He was a large man, usually quiet and reserved. Now he looked even more intimidating with his scowling face and ragged breath. "Mrs. Agnes," he growled, though he tried to lower his voice. That cat, it was back making a nuisance of itself. A nuisance? Mrs. Agnes frowned. "It was just scratching lightly at the gate, and look what you've done." She pointed at the wreckage that was once her charming gate. "What right do you have to destroy my property?" The air was thick with tension. Mr. Miller looked down at the broken gate, then back at Mrs. Agnes. The anger on his face seemed to have subsided, replaced by something akin to regret, yet also a lingering annoyance. Mrs. Agnes stood there small before the large man, but her gaze did not waver. She awaited an explanation, a reason for this unacceptable act. What had possessed her new neighbor to behave so aggressively and senselessly? Mrs. Agnes Periwinkle at 72 was accustomed to a solitary life in her small cozy house on Linden Street since her husband George, a talented carpenter, had passed away from lung cancer nearly 20 years ago. The house had become her sole companion. She found solace in the small front garden, where the roses George had planted still bloomed vibrantly each spring, and the white wooden gate also, his handiwork, though weathered by time, still bore the strong imprint of memory. Mrs. Agnes's life flowed peacefully, if somewhat solitarily. Her children, a son and a daughter, were grown and had families of their own in distant states, visiting only a few times a year for holidays. Her daily joys revolved around tending her plants, reading romantic novels by the sunlit window, or occasionally attending the town library's book club. She was a gentle woman, living quietly and disliking causing trouble for others. About 2 months prior, her peaceful routine began to experience a slight disruption with the appearance of an uninvited but frequent visitor. It was a stray cat with a brilliant fiery orange coat, a slightly thin frame, and eyes that always held a look of wariness, yet also a striking intelligence. The strange thing was, every other day, usually around mid-afternoon, when the summer heat had lessened, the cat would come to Mrs. Agnes's wooden gate. It didn't try to enter the yard, but would stand outside scratching its small claws against the wooden slats, accompanied by urgent, insistent meows, sometimes sounding like a plea, sometimes like a demand. Initially, Mrs. Agnes found it a bit bothersome. The scratching, though not loud, interrupted her concentration while reading or gardening. But then she began to pay closer attention. There was something unusual in the cat's gaze as it looked at her through the gate. It wasn't like other strays she had seen, those just looking for scraps in Rusty's eyes, for that was the name she had secretly given it. Mrs. Agnes sensed an urgency, some message it was desperately trying to convey. She thought perhaps it was hungry or looking for a safe hidden shelter. Occasionally, she left a little milk or some leftover fish near the gate, but Rusty seemed largely uninterested in the food, continuing its gate scratching and meowing routine with persistence. Meanwhile, Mr. Harold Miller, a recently retired accountant, had bought the house across the street from Mrs. Agnes about a month earlier. His wife had passed away several years ago, and his children also lived far away. So he decided to sell his large city house and move to this quieter area. However, contrary to his desire for tranquility, Mr. Miller was a rather irritable man, easily annoyed by minor disturbances. He frequently complained about the barking dog down the street, the neighbor's lawnmower, or even the sound of children playing too loudly. Thus, Rusty's appearance and its noisy habit quickly landed on Mr. Miller's list of annoyances. He considered Rusty a troublesome stray that made the neighborhood dirty, and its scratching grated on his nerves. The inciting incident was that fateful Tuesday afternoon. Mr. Miller, already in a foul mood after a frustrating morning dealing with a high electricity bill, was walking home from the grocery store when he saw Rusty harassing Mrs. Agnes's gate again. This time, the cat seemed even more insistent, scratching harder and meowing louder. For Mr. Miller, it was the last straw. The resentment that had been building up inside him exploded. He didn't think twice. His only thought was to put an immediate stop to the nuisance. The shout, "Get lost, you cat! Stop bothering me!" followed by a powerful kick aimed squarely at the old wooden gate, was the result of that sudden, uncontrolled burst of anger. The gate collapsed. Rusty, terrified, vanished like an orange streak into the bushes. Mrs. Agnes rushed out, horrified and angry. Her initial goal was clear. She had to demand an explanation from Mr. Miller for his destructive act and insist that he take responsibility for repairing the gate. Mr. Miller, once his anger had passed and he saw the damage he had caused along with Mrs. Agnes's aghast expression, began to feel a pang of regret. His face was still flushed partly from lingering anger, partly from shame. I'm truly sorry, Mrs. Agnes." He stammered, his voice less harsh now. "I didn't mean to knock the gate down. Really, it's just that cat. It was making such a racket, scratching and carrying on. I just wanted to chase it away quickly." His explanation sounded rather lame and unconvincing, especially in the face of Mrs. Agnes's distressed expression and the gate lying in a heap on the ground. Mrs. Agnes crossed her arms, her gaze fixed unwaveringly on Mr. Miller. "Just making a racket, Mr. Miller. A small cat scratching at a gate is what you call a racket deserving of having someone's gate kicked down." Her voice, though she tried to keep it steady, held a clear note of disappointment and a touch of disdain. "George, my late husband, built this gate with his own hands. To you, it might just be a pile of old wood, but to me, it's a cherished memory, an irreplaceable part of this home." Mrs. Agnes's heartfelt words, tinged with reproach, seemed to strike a chord somewhere within Mr. Miller's seemingly gruff exterior. The stubborn, defensive look on his face softened slightly. He glanced down at the broken planks on the ground, then back up at Mrs. Agnes, his eyes holding a hint of evasion and remorse. I am truly sorry, Mrs. Agnes," he said, his voice now completely devoid of its earlier irritation. "I acted too hastily, and without thinking. I will take full responsibility. I'll repair it for you, or if you prefer, I'll call a carpenter to build a new one, exactly like the old one, perhaps even better." "That goes without saying, Mr. Miller." Mrs. Agnes replied, her anger having subsided somewhat, though a chill remained in her tone. "But what I still cannot comprehend is why you would treat a small, harmless animal with such cruelty." Mr. Miller sighed, a weary expression settling on his face. He ran a hand through his thinning hair. "As I said, I don't like cats, ma'am. I've always believed them to be carriers of disease and prone to mischief. Besides," he hesitated for a moment, then continued as if trying to further justify his actions, though he knew it sounded unconvincing. "That scratching sound, it genuinely bothered me. It was so repetitive, it drove me to distraction. I couldn't concentrate on anything with that noise." Mrs. Agnes was about to offer another rebuttal to Mr. Miller's reasoning, but just then a faint, weak sound emerged from the dense bushes near where the gate had fallen. Mew, mew, mew. Both Mrs. Agnes and Mr. Miller froze, listening intently. The sound came again, clearer this time, yet incredibly fragile and tinged with desperation. It was definitely not the meow of Rusty, the orange mother cat they had just seen. This sound was much tinier, much weaker, like the cries of newborns. What was that?" Mrs. Agnes whispered, momentarily forgetting her anger towards Mr. Miller. A sense of unease began to creep into her heart. Together, they cautiously, hesitantly moved towards the bushes. Mr. Miller, being taller, took the initiative to part the dense branches, and then the sight that greeted them left both of them stunned into silence. In a small, hidden hollow, concealed by thick foliage and a few old, rotting wooden planks that someone had evidently discarded there long ago, pressed against the base of the fence line, right behind where the gate had just collapsed, was an unexpected and pitiful scene. 3 newborn kittens, their thin fur still damp and clinging to their tiny bodies, their eyes still sealed shut, were huddled together. Trembling, letting out a chorus of "ai-ai-oo's" cries. One of them, its fur a mix of pale orange with a few white patches, looked noticeably smaller and weaker than its two siblings. Mrs. Agnes let out a soft gasp of surprise and pity. Mr. Miller stood as if rooted to the spot, his face draining of color. "Oh, my dear Lord," Mrs. Agnes said, her voice trembling, her hand flying to her mouth to stifle a sob. They're kittens, Rusty. She has babies." Suddenly, all of Rusty's strange behavior over the past few days became crystal clear to Mrs. Agnes. Her persistent scratching at the gate, her urgent meows, her pleading eyes. It wasn't for food or shelter for herself. The little mother cat had been desperately trying to get Agnes's attention, trying to alert her to her kittens who were in danger, trapped in a place she couldn't rescue them from by herself. Perhaps one of the heavy planks had accidentally fallen and trapped them, or maybe they were simply stuck in the hollow with no way out. Rusty, driven by her powerful maternal instincts, had tried every means possible to seek help from a human. Mr. Miller stood there, dumbfounded. His anger, his annoyance, his irritation towards the mother cat moments ago had completely vanished, replaced by a profound sense of shame and a deep, gnawing remorse. He looked at the tiny, helpless creatures shivering from cold and hunger. Then at Mrs. Agnes's worried, compassionate face, he had completely misunderstood. His angry kick had not only destroyed the gate, but had also nearly extinguished the last hope of survival for this entire feline family. Had they not been discovered immediately afterward, I had no idea. Mr. Miller stammered, his voice thick with regret and trembling slightly. I just thought she was— "We have to get them out of there," Mrs. Agnes interrupted him, her overwhelming concern for the kittens now overriding all other emotions. "We must be very careful, Mr. Miller. That plank looks quite heavy." Without another moment's hesitation, they began the rescue mission. Mr. Miller, using his strength, carefully lifted one end of the rotting wooden plank. Mrs. Agnes, with her smaller, more nimble hands, gently reached into the opening, trying to coax each kitten out. They were so small, so fragile, she could feel their tiny bodies trembling in her palm, feel their faint, weak heartbeats. Meanwhile, Rusty, the orange mother cat, had silently reappeared. She stood a short distance away, her emerald green eyes fixed on them, filled with anxiety, trepidation, and a flicker of desperate hope. She didn't dare come closer, afraid of startling the humans, but she didn't leave either. She stood watch like a mother, anxiously awaiting news of her beloved children. Finally, after a few tense minutes, all three kittens were safely out. Mrs. Agnes gently cradled them in her arms, trying to warm them with her own body heat. Mr. Miller stood by, his face still etched with a complex mix of emotions. "They look terribly hungry," he said softly, a note of awkwardness in his voice. "And cold too, poor things." Mrs. Agnes added, her voice filled with pity, "We need to get them inside quickly and find a way to keep them warm, and then find something to feed them." She looked up at Mr. Miller, her eyes no longer holding reproach, but rather an urgent plea. Mr. Miller, could you possibly lend me a hand?" An unlikely yet desperately needed collaboration between the two neighbors, which had begun with a rather tense confrontation and a disastrous misunderstanding, was now poised to take an entirely unexpected turn, offering a chance for healing and understanding. The smallest kitten in the litter, the one with the pale orange fur interspersed with white patches on its head, lay motionless in Mrs. Agnes's palm. Its tiny body was cold to the touch, and its breathing, if any, was imperceptible. Mrs. Agnes felt her heart clench. "Oh, no," she whispered, her voice filled with despair. "This little one, it's so weak." Mr. Miller moved closer, peering down at the tiny creature. His face was a mask of concern and a deep, unspoken guilt. His actions had indirectly pushed this feline family into a more precarious situation. If he hadn't kicked down the gate, perhaps Mrs. Agnes would have noticed something amiss sooner and found a way to help them. But this was no time for recriminations. Mrs. Agnes, drawing on the experience of having raised a few litters of kittens in her younger days when George was still alive, acted swiftly. "Mr. Miller, quickly fetch me a clean soft towel and a cardboard box not too large," she said, her voice urgent, yet surprisingly calm. "We have to try and save it," while Mr. Miller hurried into Mrs. Agnes's utility shed to find the requested items. She gently placed the frail kitten on a clean cloth on the porch table. She pressed her ear to its tiny chest. Nothing, but she refused to give up. She recalled what she had read and what George had once shown her. Carefully, she tilted the kitten's head back slightly and with her own mouth gently breathed into its nose and mouth a slow, steady rhythm. Then, using 2 fingertips, she began to massage its tiny chest in small, continuous circles. Mr. Miller returned with an old but clean bath towel and an empty shoebox. He watched Mrs. Agnes, a mixture of admiration for her composure and a feeling of helplessness at not knowing what more he could do. "Put the towel in the box, Mr. Miller," Mrs. Agnes instructed, her eyes never leaving the kitten. "Make a warm, cozy nest. The other 2 need to be kept warm immediately." Mr. Miller awkwardly complied. He carefully folded the towel inside the box, trying to create a soft depression in the middle. Then he gently placed the 2 stronger kittens inside. They snuggled together, letting out faint, weak chip-chip sounds. Time seemed to drag on each second, heavy with suspense. Mrs. Agnes patiently continued her efforts, breathing for the kitten, massaging its chest. Beads of perspiration dotted her forehead, but she didn't stop. Mr. Miller stood beside her, occasionally glancing down at the kitten, silently praying. The silence between them was no longer one of tension or anger, but of shared hope and anxiety. And then a miracle. After nearly 10 minutes of relentless effort, the kitten stirred faintly. A tiny, barely audible chip escaped its minuscule mouth. Mrs. Agnes let out a soft gasp. She could feel a very faint, very weak, but definite heartbeat. It's breathing," she exclaimed, her voice trembling with emotion. "Thank God it's alive." Mr. Miller also let out a sigh of relief, a rare smile gracing his usually stern features. "You're amazing, Mrs. Agnes." Mrs. Agnes carefully wrapped the weak kitten in another corner of the towel and placed it in the makeshift nest with its siblings. She knew it was still incredibly fragile and would require special care. That very moment, the shared struggle to save the tiny kitten's life became the true turning point in the relationship between Mrs. Agnes and Mr. Miller. The initial confrontation, the suspicion, the annoyance had completely dissolved, replaced by a sense of empathy, respect, and an unexpected bond forged in a perilous situation. They had faced a challenge together, shared a hope together, and witnessed a small miracle together. From two distant, even somewhat antagonistic neighbors, they had become reluctant collaborators, united by a common goal to save the kittens. Rusty, the mother cat, seemed to sense the change in atmosphere. She slowly approached the box, sniffing cautiously at her offspring. Seeing them safe and warm, she looked up at Mrs. Agnes, then at Mr. Miller, her green eyes no longer fearful, but shining with a profound gratitude. She softly rubbed her head against Mrs. Agnes's leg, then to Mr. Miller's surprise, nudged his trousers gently, an incredibly trusting gesture. "Perhaps we should call this one Lucky," Mrs. Agnes said, with a smile, looking at the kitten that had just cheated death. Mr. Miller nodded. "A very fine name, ma'am. It suits him perfectly." He hesitated for a moment, then said, "Mrs. Agnes, about the gate, I'll fix it first thing tomorrow morning. I'll build a new one, stronger and better than before. And, if you don't mind, I'd like to help you look after these kittens, at least until they're a bit stronger." Mr. Miller's offer genuinely surprised and touched Mrs. Agnes. It wasn't just a promise to rectify a mistake. It was a significant step in mending their relationship and a testament to the change in him. "Thank you, Mr. Miller," she said, her voice sincere. "I would be very grateful for your help." The point of no return had been reached. From this moment on, the lives of Mrs. Agnes and Mr. Miller, as well as Rusty's feline family, were set on an entirely new course, one filled with hope and warmth. Their perceptions of each other had profoundly changed, and an unspoken commitment had formed between them to protect and nurture these tiny, precious lives. In the days that followed the incident with the gate and the rescue of the kittens, a new, unstated routine was established between Mrs. Agnes and Mr. Miller. Every morning, after his light exercises, Mr. Miller would make his way over to Mrs. Agnes's house. Initially, it was to inquire about the condition of Lucky, the weakest kitten, and its siblings. But these visits quickly evolved into shared responsible work sessions and companionable conversations. Mrs. Agnes, drawing on her past experience, took on the delicate task of feeding the kittens milk using a small dropper. It was a job that demanded immense patience and dexterity, as they were still so tiny and fragile. Mr. Miller, in turn, was responsible for cleaning their cardboard box nest, replacing the soiled towels with fresh ones, and ensuring that Rusty, the mother cat, always had plenty of fresh water and food. He even fashioned a small temporary wooden shelter with a roof in a corner of Mrs. Agnes's porch, where Rusty could rest and watch over her kittens, protected from the elements. Through these shared tasks, they began to understand each other better. Mrs. Agnes learned that Mr. Miller had been a mechanical engineer, that his wife had passed away young from a severe illness, and that he had moved here to escape the hustle and bustle of the city and to be closer to nature. He spoke of the weekends he often spent fishing alone, of the quiet loneliness of a widower with few friends. In return, Mr. Miller heard Mrs. Agnes talk about George, about their youthful memories, about the garden they had cultivated together. He saw their old photographs hanging on the wall and sensed the deep love that still permeated every corner of the house. He realized that Mrs. Agnes was not just an elderly woman living alone, but a strong, affectionate individual with a kind heart. The broken wooden gate was also promptly repaired by Mr. Miller. He didn't just replace the broken slats. He reinforced the entire frame and gave it a fresh coat of white paint. The gate now looked even sturdier and more beautiful than before. That act was not merely compensation for his initial mistake. It was a symbol of reconciliation and a new beginning in the relationship between the two neighbors. However, caring for newborn kittens was not always smooth sailing. One evening, Lucky suddenly refused to feed, and his little body grew cold again. Mrs. Agnes was worried sick. She feared their efforts would be in vain. Mr. Miller, upon learning of it the next morning, didn't hesitate to drive into town to the only veterinary clinic in the area. Although the vet explained that the chances of survival for such a weak newborn kitten were often slim, Mr. Miller still managed to purchase a special milk formula for kittens and a small heating lamp. Following the vet's advice, Mr. Miller's dedication deeply moved Mrs. Agnes. Together they took turns caring for Lucky, feeding him drop by drop, keeping him warm with the heating lamp. Rusty, too, seemed to sense their anxiety, hovering around the nest, occasionally licking Lucky gently. This could be considered the dark night of the soul for both of them. Mrs. Agnes faced the fear of loss once more, the fear that she wasn't strong enough to protect these fragile lives. As for Mr. Miller, he grappled with a sense of helplessness and the haunting memory of his initial mistake. If Lucky didn't make it, he knew he would never forgive himself. But then, like another small miracle, Lucky slowly began to recover. He started to suckle a little milk, then more. His body temperature stabilized. The tiny kitten's fierce will to live reignited hope and brought indescribable joy to both Mrs. Agnes and Mr. Miller. Overcoming this challenge further strengthened their bond. They were no longer just neighbors, helping each other. They had become true friends, sharing joys, sorrows, and responsibilities. The kittens grew astonishingly fast. Before long, they had opened their eyes, begun to take their first wobbly steps, and started to play fight with each other in their warm nest. Mrs. Agnes and Mr. Miller would often sit on the porch, silently watching them, gentle smiles on their faces. Their own conversations and laughter also became more frequent, dispelling the quiet solitude that had once characterized both their homes. Rusty, the mother cat, now completely trusted her two kind human benefactors. Her earlier shyness and wariness had vanished. She moved freely around Mrs. Agnes's yard, occasionally rubbing against Mr. Miller's legs as a silent thank you. When the kittens were about 6 weeks old and weaned, it was time to think about their future. Mrs. Agnes knew she couldn't keep all three. Her house was too small and she was getting on in years. A touch of sadness crept into her heart. Mr. Miller seemed to understand. One afternoon, while they were feeding the playful kittens, he suddenly said, "Mrs. Agnes, I have an idea. Why don't we try to find homes for the two bigger ones? As for Lucky, if you don't mind, I think he should stay with you. He needs special care and you understand him best." He paused, then added a little shyly, "And if you agree, I'd like to adopt one myself. Perhaps that little calico female, my house could use a little warmth too." Mr. Miller's suggestion once again took Mrs. Agnes by surprise. It was a solution she hadn't dared to consider. The decision to find new homes for two of the three kittens was not an easy one for Mrs. Agnes. Though she had only cared for them for a little over a month, she had grown deeply attached to each one. Lucky, with his initial frailty and extraordinary will to live, held a particularly special place in her heart. Mr. Miller's idea that she keep Lucky and he adopt another, the calico female he named Patches, after his late wife's former cat, eased some of her worries. But what about the remaining one, a lively, affectionate gray tabby male? Together, they drafted a small notice complete with a few adorable photos of the gray kitten and asked the young woman at the corner grocery store to post it on the community notice board. Several days passed without any inquiries. Mrs. Agnes began to feel anxious. Would anyone want to adopt a kitten of unknown origin? What if no one came forward? The thought of having to take him to the animal shelter weighed heavily on her heart. One late weekend afternoon, as Mrs. Agnes and Mr. Miller were sitting on the porch watching the kittens tumble and play with Rusty, an unfamiliar car pulled up in front of her house. A young couple and their little daughter got out. They were the ones who had seen the notice. The little girl, about 5 or 6 years old, with wide, curious eyes and golden blonde hair, was immediately captivated by the gray tabby kitten who was peeking. Unterschied from behind Mrs. Agnes's legs. "Mommy, Daddy, look at the cute kitty," she exclaimed. The meeting unfolded naturally. The young couple seemed to be genuine animal lovers with experience in cat care. They asked many questions about the gray kitten's personality and health. The little girl gently played with him, her clear, bright laughter echoing through the garden. The climax of the story was not a dramatic confrontation, but an emotional decision. After nearly an hour of conversation and play, the couple expressed their desire to adopt the gray kitten. Mrs. Agnes looked at the kitten, now purring contentedly in the little girl's arms, then glanced at Mr. Miller. Their eyes met. There was a hint of bitter sweetness, but also a sense of peace. They knew this was the best outcome for the kitten. As the small family prepared to leave with their new member, the little girl turned back and gave Mrs. Agnes a hug. "Thank you for taking care of him, ma'am," she said. "I promise to love him very much." In that moment, Mrs. Agnes's heart swelled with a warm, sweet emotion. She had not only saved a life, but had also brought joy to another family. Mr. Miller stood beside her, gently placing a hand on her shoulder, a gesture of comfort and shared understanding. The question of the kitten's future had found a perfect answer. Worry had given way to joy and contentment. After the gray tabby, whom the new family named Smokey, found his new home life on Linden Street, seemed to take on an even richer meaning. Lucky, true to his name, was indeed fortunate to stay with Mrs. Agnes. The once frail kitten had blossomed into a lively young cat. Though still a bit smaller than other cats his age, he became Mrs. Agnes's loyal companion, rarely leaving her side during her golden years. The faint chip-chip of his kittenhood was now replaced by contented purrs whenever she stroked him. Mr. Miller also found new joy with Patches. The gentle and affectionate calico brought warmth and laughter to his quiet home. Every afternoon after finishing his gardening, he would carry Patches over to Mrs. Agnes's house for a visit. The two neighbors and their two beloved cats would often gather on the porch, sharing everyday stories, Mrs. Agnes's homemade cookies, and comfortable silences. Rusty, the intelligent and brave orange mother cat, remained a frequent visitor. She seemed to consider both houses her territory, free to come and go, always greeted with affectionate pets and tasty treats. Occasionally, she would lead Lucky and Patches on a stroll around the neighborhood like a proud mother, showing off her beautiful children. The white wooden gate where it all began now stood not just as a part of Mrs. Agnes's home, but as a beautiful symbol of neighborly affection, compassion, and understanding. It was a testament to the fact that from a harmful misunderstanding and a moment of anger, good things could still emerge and flourish. The story of the orange cat's cry for help quickly spread throughout Linden Street. Mrs. Agnes and Mr. Miller, once distant, even slightly antagonistic neighbors, became close friends, an example of forgiveness and the capacity for change. People spoke of them with admiration and affection, often joking that the kittens had brought a touch of magic. Drawing hearts closer together, Mrs. Agnes no longer felt lonely. Her days were now filled with joy and laughter. Miller, too, found peace and simple happiness in his retirement, and it all started with a stray orange cat, with its persistent scratching at a gate and an urgent plea for help that no one initially understood. Sometimes the smallest annoyances hide the most profound lessons about love and connection between people and with the little creatures that share our world. The stray cat kept scratching the floor, then a stranger smashed the floor and screamed. "Wait, what are you doing?" Eleanor screamed as the strange handyman suddenly smashed the floor with a crowbar. But then, as wooden planks flew, the handyman himself let out a horrified cry at what was revealed beneath. What made them both scream like that, and what was the buried secret? To follow this haunting journey of uncovering the truth, don't forget to subscribe, like, and listen to the full story. The sound of splintering wood tore through the afternoon, quiet. A loud crash echoed, followed by a cloud of dust billowing up from the living room floor, which only moments before had been intact. Mrs. Eleanor Vance stood frozen, her hand still clutching the telephone, her unfinished call to the plumber cut short by an even more piercing sound, her own scream. No. The scream died in her throat, choked off as she stared at the gaping hole in the middle of the floor. The strange man, the one who had appeared at her door less than 10 minutes ago with a tool bag and a cursory explanation about a routine gas line inspection appointment she didn't recall making, now stood stunned, the crowbar still in his hand. His face was ashen, his initial confidence gone. But it wasn't his destructive act that horrified Eleanor so, nor was it entirely the blatant violation of her private space. It was what lay beneath. In the dim twilight filtering through the dusty window pane, something dark and misshapen was emerging from beneath the shattered wooden planks. It was unclear, covered by dirt and wood splinters, but it had a shape that made Eleanor's stomach clench. A musty, acrid smell, a scent she had never encountered in this house before, rose from the hole. The cat. The orange stray she had named Rusty, the indirect reason for this man's presence, was no longer scratching frantically. It cowered by the armchair, fur-bristling eyes wide with alarm, a low, threatening growl rumbling in its throat, aimed directly at the hole. The man swallowed hard. Mrs. Vance," he stammered, his voice trembling, the crowbar slipping from his grasp and clattering kashkly onto the floor. He took a step back, then another, his eyes fixed on the darkness beneath the floor. Then he screamed too. a short, choked cry full of revulsion and utter panic. He whirled around, knocking over a small chair as he bolted for the front door, his heavy footsteps echoing and then fading as he disappeared down the street. Eleanor remained standing there, paralyzed. The man's scream was like a wake-up call, pulling her from her initial stupor. Her heart hammered as if it would burst from her chest. She trembled as she stepped closer, trying to get a better look into the hole. The stench grew stronger, and then she saw it, a part of it, enough to understand. Eleanor swayed, grabbing the wall to keep from falling. The world tilted around her. No, it couldn't be. This couldn't be happening here in her house, the house she had shared with her late husband Arthur for 40 years. It all began quietly, almost unnoticeably, about 6 months after Arthur passed away. Mrs. Eleanor Vance, at 68, found herself lost in the oppressive silence of the old 2-story house in the small town of Oak Haven, Maine. Arthur, her gentle, quiet husband, had died suddenly from a heart attack, leaving a vast emptiness in her life and in their home, filled with memories. Her days were long and endless. She puttered in her small garden, read books, and tried to get used to the loneliness. Then Rusty appeared, a stray cat, his fur the color of burnt orange autumn leaves, initially just a fleeting shadow at the edge of her backyard. Eleanor, though never particularly a cat person, found her heart softening at his skittishness. She began leaving food and water on the back porch. Gradually, Rusty grew bolder, allowing her to get a little closer each day. His silent presence brought a bit of warmth to her empty days. About 2 months ago, Rusty started behaving utpadkly. He would sneak into the house whenever she inadvertently left the back door ajar, and he began to scratch the floor, not the usual claw sharpening of a cat. Rusty focused solely on one spot, on the old oak floorboards in the living room near the unused fireplace. At first, Eleanor just shooed him away, thinking it was a mischievous habit. But Rusty's persistence became increasingly alarming. He scratched urgently, almost desperately, the scritch-scritch of his claws on the wood, becoming a familiarly unsettling sound in the house. Eleanor tried everything. She placed a rug over the spot. Rusty pulled it aside. She sprayed cat repellent. Rusty seemed annoyed, but always returned. She inspected the area thoroughly. The floor seemed solid, with no signs of mice or termites. Arthur, a skilled carpenter, had laid this floor himself many years ago. She couldn't recall anything unusual about it. Her anxiety grew when she started noticing a faint, strange odor whenever she neared that area. A damp, slightly acrid, indescribable smell. She tried to ignore it, attributing it to the old house, but Rusty's increasingly bizarre behavior wouldn't let her rest. The cat grew thinner. His coat lost its sheen, and his eyes always held an inexplicable tension whenever he looked towards that corner of the living room. The tipping point came that morning. Eleanor woke to even more vigorous scratching than usual. Rusty was practically digging tiny wood splinters flying around him. Watching the small animal act so frantically, a genuine sense of unease washed over her. Something was wrong. Very wrong. The decision was made. She had to find out what was under there. She tried using a kitchen knife to pry open a gap between the planks, but they were too tight and solid. She wasn't strong enough. She considered calling a carpenter, but hesitated. How would she explain it? "I want you to rip up my floor because my cat keeps scratching it." It sounded ridiculous. Finally, She remembered a business card for a general repair service someone had stuck in her mailbox the previous week. Oak Haven Handyman Services, all jobs big or small. Perhaps they could inspect the floor discreetly. She called the number, vaguely explaining about checking a possibly damaged floor. A man's voice on the other end said they didn't have professional carpenters, but could send someone to look at pipes or basic structural issues, as floors were sometimes affected by those. They said a technician doing routine gas line inspections might be in her area that afternoon and could stop by. Eleanor, though, finding it a bit odd, agreed as long as someone came to look. And then the man appeared, looking nothing like a gas technician, with his dusty appearance and a rather heavy-looking tool bag. He introduced himself as Jake, as Eleanor was trying to explain the cat's behavior and her concern about the specific spot on the floor where Rusty was now growling and scratching lightly. Jake suddenly cut her off, his eyes fixed on that spot. "I think I know what the problem is," he said, his voice strangely decisive. Before Eleanor could react, he had put down his tool bag, pulled out a crowbar, and with unexpected force brought it down on the floor. That was the moment that led to the horrifying scream and chaos in Part 1. The inciting incident wasn't just Rusty's scratching, but Eleanor's decision to let a stranger into her home and allow him to shatter the fragile piece of her life, only to confront a terrible truth buried right beneath her feet. After the man named Jake fled the house in a panic, leaving Eleanor with a gaping hole and a horrifying secret just unveiled, silence crashed down on the living room. Only her ragged breathing and Rusty's incessant growl remained, the cat still warily eyeing the darkness beneath the floor. Eleanor stumbled back, her mind reeling. What she had seen, even just a part of it, was unmistakable. A human hand, skeletal, with a few tattered pieces of fabric clinging to it, protruding from the dirt and wood debris. Nausea rose in her throat. Arthur, her husband, the kind man who loved plants and old books. How could he? No, it couldn't be. There had to be some explanation. She looked around the room as if searching for an answer among the familiar objects. Her gaze fell on the telephone still lying on the table. The police. She had to call the police. But another thought, colder and more terrifying, crept into her mind. If this was really a human skeleton, and it was in her house under the floor Arthur had laid, what did that mean? Was Arthur involved? Or was he a victim? Or worse, was he the perpetrator? The questions swirled, each more agonizing than the last. Before she could make a decision, a sound at the front door made her jump. Not the bell, but a soft, almost tentative knock. Rusty hissed, then fell silent, pressing closer to the leg of the chair. Eleanor held her breath. Had that Jake fellow returned, or was it someone else? She didn't dare answer. "Mrs. Vance," a woman's voice called from outside. "Are you in there? I'm Detective Miller, Oak Haven Police Department. Your neighbor reported hearing a loud scream and seeing someone run from your house looking distraught. Is everything all right?" The neighbor, of course. Jake's scream. Eleanor felt a flicker of relief, but the fear remained. The police. There was no turning back now. She took a deep breath, trying to steady her trembling voice. Yes, I'm here." The door's unlocked. The door opened, and a woman in her 40s with a stern face but kind eyes stepped in. A young male officer followed her. Detective Miller immediately noticed Eleanor's dazed expression and the hole in the living room floor. Good Lord, she exclaimed, looking from the hole to Eleanor. What happened here, Mrs. Vance? Eleanor recounted everything from Rusty's strange behavior, the call to the repair service, Jake's arrival, his sudden destruction of the floor, and then the horrifying discovery. She tried to remain calm, but her voice broke in places. Detective Miller listened intently, occasionally jotting notes in a small pad. When Eleanor finished, she looked her straight in the eye. "Mrs. Vance, do you recognize what's under there?" Eleanor shook her head, tears beginning to well up. I only saw a hand. I don't know." Detective Miller nodded. "All right, Mrs. Vance. We'll call in the forensics team. I need you to stay calm. Do you have somewhere else you can stay tonight? Friends or relatives?" Eleanor thought of her niece Sarah in Portland, about a 2-hour drive away, but the thought of explaining this to Sarah made her shudder. I don't know." Over the next few hours, Eleanor's house transformed into a crime scene. Flashing lights bar uniformed personnel moving in and out, a low hum of conversation. The forensics team carefully excavated the area beneath the floor. Eleanor sat in the kitchen, dazed, a young female officer having given her a cup of tea. Rusty, after a period of fear, finally emerged from under the chair and came to rub against her legs as if offering comfort. Detective Miller returned several hours later, her expression even graver. "Mrs. Vance, we found an almost complete skeleton. Based on some personal effects found with it, it appears to be male, and it's been there for a very, very long time. Possibly several decades. Several decades. Arthur and she had bought this house 40 years ago. The living room floor was already laid then. Arthur had only refurbished it a bit. That meant, my husband, Arthur, did he know?" Eleanor whispered. "We can't say for sure yet, Mrs. Vance, but there's something we found that complicates matters." Detective Miller paused. Besides the skeleton, there was a small metal box almost completely rusted through. Inside there was some old currency and a small ledger recording sums of money and a few names. One of them is your husband's, Arthur Vance. Eleanor's world seemed to collapse. Arthur, the ledger, money. What on earth was going on? "No, it can't be," she stammered. "Arthur was a gentle accountant. He would never—" "We also found something else, Mrs. Vance." Detective Miller continued, her voice steady. "A small old-fashioned handgun lying near the skeleton's hand. It looks like there was a struggle." Eleanor felt numb. A dead body, a ledger with her husband's name, and a gun. Her peaceful home, her seemingly quiet life were all an illusion. The following days passed in a nightmarish haze. Eleanor had to answer countless questions from the police. Her house was partially cordoned off. News spread like wildfire through the small town of Oak Haven. Whispers, curious stares. She felt like she was on trial. The man named Jake, the one who had smashed the floor, was found later. His real name was Jacob Brewer, a man with a criminal record for petty theft. He confessed he'd overheard rumors in low-level criminal circles about a treasure hidden in an old house in Oak Haven, connected to a mysterious disappearance from years ago. He'd managed to get into the house under the guise of a repairman, and the cat's strange behavior convinced him he'd found the right spot. When he saw the hand, he'd been too scared and fled. He claimed to know nothing more about the skeleton or the ledger. Rusty the stray cat now became an unwilling center of attention. Some said he had a special sense. Others thought it was just a coincidence. But for Eleanor, Rusty's scratching was no longer an annoyance. It was a warning, an urge to confront the truth. The police struggled to identify the skeleton. Time had erased many clues. The ledger became the most crucial piece of evidence. Besides Arthur's name, there were a few others and figures noting sums of money not large but regular, spanning a few years, about 35 to 40 years ago. Eleanor tried to recall that period. It was when they had first moved to Oak Haven. Arthur was working for a small accounting firm in town. Their life had been quite modest. She didn't remember him showing any unusual behavior or having any shady connections. A week later, Detective Miller came to her with new information. "We've identified one of the names in the ledger besides your husband's, a man named Michael Rafferty. According to old records, Rafferty was a known loan shark in Portland in the 70s and early 80s. He disappeared without a trace around 1985. 1985. The time frame matched the ledger entries. So, my husband was involved with a loan shark." Eleanor felt it hard to breathe. "We don't know the exact nature of the relationship yet, Mrs. Vance. Your husband could have been a victim or someone who kept books for Rafferty, or—" Detective Miller hesitated. "Or it could be something else." Suspicion hung in the air. Eleanor knew the police, though unspoken, were considering the possibility that Arthur was directly involved in the death of the man under the floor. Her house, where she had once felt safe, now held a dark secret, and the husband she had loved for so many years might not be the man she thought he was. The investigation seemed to hit a dead end. The skeleton, though preliminarily identified as Michael Rafferty, still lacked a definitive DNA match due to the absence of relatives to provide samples. The ledger, with its vague entries, was the only clue, but it raised more questions than answers. Eleanor lived through heavy days, haunted by what had been found and what might still be hidden. The image of her late husband, Arthur, began to fracture in her mind. She couldn't accept that Arthur, the gentle man who loved gardening and reading poetry, could be involved in a murder or in criminal underworld. She decided she couldn't just sit idly by and wait for the police. She had to find out for herself. She needed to clear Arthur's name, or at least understand what had truly happened in his past. This was the turning point. From an elderly, reclusive, grieving woman, Eleanor was forced to become proactive. Her initial fear gave way to a quiet determination. She began to go through Arthur's old belongings, boxes of papers, photo albums, hoping to find some clue the police might have overlooked. In an old box stored in the attic, amidst tax papers and yellowed technical drawings, she found a small journal belonging to Arthur. It wasn't a daily diary, but more like a notebook. He used to jot down random thoughts, ideas, sometimes book quotes. Most of it was mundane, but a few pages written around 1984, 1985 caught her attention. Arthur wrote about financial difficulties, about increasing pressure, and a few times mentioned someone Gumegged M.R. with words full of anxiety and even contempt. "M.R. won't let go," one entry read. "He thinks he can control everyone." M.R. Could it be Michael Rafferty? Eleanor felt her heart beat faster. She continued reading. There was a passage where Arthur wrote about feeling trapped and wanting out. Then abruptly, the entries about M.R. ceased in late 1985. After that, the journal only contained notes about gardening and the books he read. As if a storm had passed, At the same time, Detective Miller contacted her. "Mrs. Vance, we have new information. We've found an old acquaintance of Michael Rafferty, an old gambler named Leo the Lip Lipinski. He's currently in a nursing home in Augusta. Leo seems willing to talk, perhaps in exchange for some leniency." Eleanor felt a faint glimmer of hope. "Can I go with you?" she asked, slightly surprising Detective Miller. "I want to hear it directly. Arthur was my husband. I need to know the truth." After a moment's hesitation, Detective Miller agreed. Perhaps Eleanor's presence, a wife seeking the truth about her husband, would make Leo more inclined to talk. The nursing home where Leo Lipinski resided seemed dreary and lifeless. Leo, a thin old man with shrewd eyes, sat in a wheelchair looking at Eleanor and Detective Miller with curiosity. "Michael Rafferty, huh?" Leo snorted. "Haven't heard that name in ages. Guy was a viper, greedy, ruthless, loan shark involved in all sorts of dirty business." "Did you know Arthur Vance?" Detective Miller asked. Leo squinted, thinking. Vance rings a bell. An accountant worked for one of the companies Rafferty used to launder money for. Eleanor's heart felt like it stopped. "Money laundering Arthur. My husband would never," she began, but Leo cut her off. "Hey, lady, times were tough back then. Rafferty had ways of making people work for him. Maybe your husband didn't have a choice. I heard Rafferty trusted this accountant Mubloch because the guy looked honest. No one would suspect him." "What happened to Rafferty?" Detective Miller asked. "He disappeared in 1985. Leo chuckled dryly. "Disappeared? Everyone thought so. But word on the street was Rafferty pissed off the wrong people. He had a black book, listing all his dirty deals, debts, names of big shots. That book was his insurance. But it was also his death warrant. Someone wanted to shut him up and get that book." "Who?" Leo shrugged. "Who knows? Portland was wild back then. Could have been a rival, or one of his debtors, or maybe someone Rafferty trusted most betrayed him." Leo's eyes flickered toward Eleanor, an unreadable expression. On the way back, Eleanor was silent. Arthur had been Rafferty's bookkeeper. That explained the ledger found with the skeleton. Perhaps it was the black book Leo mentioned, or part of it. But it didn't explain why Rafferty was dead under their floor, nor the gun. When she arrived back in Oak Haven, Eleanor found Rusty sitting by the front door as if waiting for her. The cat rubbed against her legs. She picked him up, feeling his warmth and his purr. This cat had started it all. That night, she couldn't sleep. She reread Arthur's journal entries. MR won't let go. Wanting out. Then she remembered a detail she hadn't noticed before. In the last days, Arthur wrote about MR. There was a line, "No other choice. Must protect myself and my family." Family? That was her. What had Arthur done to protect her? An idea flashed through her mind. The gun, the struggle. Perhaps Arthur wasn't the attacker. Perhaps he was defending himself. Perhaps Rafferty had come to their house, threatened Arthur, maybe even threatened her. And Arthur, in a desperate moment, had fought back. It was a theory, but it gave her a fragile hope that her husband wasn't a cold-blooded killer. But if so, why did he bury the body under the floor? Why did he keep that secret for so many years? Even from her, Eleanor knew she had reached a point of no return. She had to find out the whole truth, no matter how painful. Her role had changed. She was no longer just a passive observer. She was the only one who could truly understand Arthur and perhaps the only one who could find out who was really responsible for Michael Rafferty's death if it wasn't her husband. And perhaps that person was still out there. The theory that Arthur had defended himself against Michael Rafferty offered Eleanor some comfort, but it also opened up a new series of troubling questions. If Arthur had killed Rafferty, even in self-defense, why hadn't he called the police? Why choose to bury that sin right under their feet for so many years? Fear, shame, or was there another deeper reason? She decided to focus on the ledger found with the skeleton. It listed not only Arthur and Rafferty's names, but also a few others alongside sums of money. Detective Miller had shown her a copy. One of those names, Elias Thorne, particularly caught her attention. Thorne was a prominent businessman in Oak Haven, a generous donor to town charities, a pillar of the community. His picture often appeared in the local newspaper. Could a man like Elias Thorne be involved with a loan shark like Rafferty? Eleanor recalled Leo Lipinski's words. Rafferty laundered money for many people, and his black book contained the names of big shots. Was Thorne one of them? And if so, did he know about Rafferty's disappearance and the ledger? She began to discreetly research Elias Thorne. She went to the town library, rereading old newspaper articles about Thorne's business activities from the 80s. His construction company had boomed rapidly during that period, surprisingly winning many large town contracts. There were some vague whispers about Thorne having powerful connections and not being afraid to use aggressive tactics to achieve his goals. Meanwhile, Detective Miller continued her investigation. They discovered that the gun found near Rafferty's remains was unregistered. Fingerprints on it were mostly wiped clean, but there were a few faint, unidentifiable smudges. They also re-examined Arthur's financial records from those years. No unusually large sums of money had been deposited into his account, other than his accountant's salary. This further strengthened the theory that Arthur hadn't profited from Rafferty's death. One afternoon, as Eleanor was tending to Arthur's rose garden, a black luxury car pulled up in front of her house. Elias Thorne emerged, wearing his usual affable smile. "Mrs. Vance," Thorne said, his voice a warm baritone. "I heard about the unfortunate incident at your home. It's quite a shock for our whole town. Arthur was a good man. I was very sorry about his passing, and now this." Eleanor felt a chill run down her spine. Thorne's friendly demeanor didn't lessen her suspicion. "Thank you, Mr. Thorne. It has indeed been very difficult. I just wanted to stop by and see if you needed anything," Thorne continued. "The Oak Haven community always sticks together to help. And if there's anything concerning Arthur's past that you find confusing, perhaps I, as an old friend and someone who knows this town well, could help shed some light." The offer seemed kind, but Thorne's eyes held a sharp, probing quality. Eleanor suddenly realized Thorne hadn't come to comfort her. He had come to probe to see what she knew. "Did you know Michael Rafferty, Mr. Thorne?" Eleanor asked directly, looking him in the eye. Thorne's smile faltered for a fraction of a second, but he quickly regained his composure. "Rafferty. The name sounds vaguely familiar. A businessman from Portland, wasn't he? I believe I might have heard of him, but no direct dealings." A blatant lie. Eleanor felt more certain than ever that Thorne was involved. After Thorne left, Eleanor called Detective Miller, recounting the meeting. "I think he's hiding something, Detective. He seemed nervous when I mentioned Rafferty. We're suspicious of Thorne, too. Mrs. Vance, Detective Miller admitted. His company's financial records from that period have many questionable points, unclear expenditures. But we don't have concrete evidence to charge him yet. In the following days, Eleanor felt like she was being watched. A strange car would occasionally drive slowly past her house. There were silent phone calls. Rusty, her cat, also became uneasy, frequently growling at the window at night. Eleanor knew she was in danger. If Thorne was indeed involved in Rafferty's death, and if he thought she knew too much, or that the ledger could implicate him, he wouldn't hesitate to act. She faced a dark night of the soul. She missed Arthur, missed the safety and peace he had provided. She wondered if digging up this past was worth it. Maybe she should leave everything to the police. But then the image of Rafferty's hand under the floor, Arthur's desperate journal entries, and Thorne's smugness would return. She couldn't stop. For Arthur and for the truth itself. She decided she had to find more evidence against Thorne. She recalled Arthur once mentioning a small storage unit he rented on the outskirts of town to keep old belongings and expired work files. Maybe, just maybe, there was something Arthur had stored there, some proof concerning Thorne that he hadn't dared keep at home. Together with Detective Miller, who was initially skeptical but eventually convinced by Eleanor's determination, they went to the old dusty storage unit. Inside, amidst cobweb-covered boxes, they found another small locked iron box. The lock was rusted, but they managed to open it. Inside, not money or ledgers, but a small cassette tape and a few blurry photographs. The photos showed Elias Thorne meeting Michael Rafferty in a dimly lit bar, and on the tape, after it was cleaned and played at the police station, was a recording. Arthur's voice came through faint and trembling, but clear. He was talking to Rafferty. Rafferty was threatening Arthur, demanding he continue handling the numbers for Thorne and others, or his family would be in trouble. Then came Thorne's voice ordering Rafferty to keep this accountant quiet. After that, the tape recorded chaotic sounds, furniture crashing, Rafferty's scream, then a gunshot, and then Arthur's heavy breathing. That was the proof. Arthur had been coerced. Thorne was the mastermind behind it, and perhaps Thorne himself had eliminated Rafferty or ordered him killed when he felt Rafferty was becoming a liability or a threat, then framed Arthur or arranged the scene. Detective Miller looked at Eleanor. Mrs. Vance, your husband, might have recorded this to protect himself. He might have been set up by Thorne. Now they had enough evidence to confront Thorne, but Thorne was a powerful and dangerous man. The final confrontation was imminent, and Eleanor knew it wouldn't be easy. The stakes were at their highest. She and Detective Miller needed to prepare thoroughly. Rusty somehow seemed to sense the tension. He didn't leave Eleanor's side, his amber eyes constantly alert. With the audio tape and photographs as evidence, Detective Miller obtained a warrant to search Elias Thorne's home and office. However, before they could execute it, Thorne seemed to have sensed the danger. Late one evening, as Eleanor sat alone in her living room trying to read, but her mind constantly on the upcoming events, the doorbell rang. Her heart leaped. She wasn't expecting anyone. Rusty, curled up on Arthur's armchair, suddenly lifted his head, growling. Eleanor carefully peeked through the peephole. It was Elias Thorne, alone. "Mrs. Vance, I know you're in there." Thorne's voice came through, no longer friendly but cold and urgent. "We need to talk. Open the door." Eleanor stood frozen, terrified. She knew she shouldn't open it. She reached for the phone to call Detective Miller. Don't even think about calling the police." Thorne continued as if reading her mind. "If you don't open this door, I'll break it down. And I don't think you want your neighbors witnessing another commotion." The threat made Eleanor hesitate. She knew Thorne was ruthless enough to do it. Trembling, she opened the door a crack. Thorne slipped inside quick as a snake. "We have things to discuss, Mrs. Vance," Thorne said, his eyes scanning the room, then settling on the chair where Arthur used to sit. "I know you found some things that don't belong to you." "I don't know what you're talking about." Eleanor tried to keep her voice steady. Thorne sneered. "Don't play dumb. The tape, the photos. Your husband was a troublemaker even in death." He moved closer to her. "I want them. And I want the original ledger, not the copy the police have. I don't have them here." "Do you think I'm a fool?" Thorne roared, his polished veneer vanishing, revealing the true face of a thug. "You and that damn detective are trying to set me up." Just then, Rusty suddenly leaped from the chair, letting out an angry "Meow!" and lunging at Thorne's legs, scratching hard. "Ah!" Thorne cried out in pain and surprise, stumbling backward. Seizing the opportunity, Eleanor shouted, "Help me! There's an intruder!" She ran towards the front door, hoping to attract her neighbor's attention. Thorne, enraged by the cat's attack and Eleanor's actions, grabbed a small bronze statue from a table, intending to strike her. But Rusty lunged again, this time biting Thorne's wrist, causing him to drop the statue. Eleanor's screams and the sound of crashing had worked. The neighbor's porch light flicked on. A door opened. Thorne looked outside, saw he was exposed, swore, and then turned back to Eleanor with a hateful glare. "This isn't over, old woman." He shoved Eleanor aside and bolted out the back door, disappearing into the darkness of the garden. A few minutes later, police sirens wailed. Detective Miller and officers swarmed the scene. Eleanor, though still shaking, was safe. Rusty rubbed against her legs like a tiny hero. Elias Thorne didn't get far. With the irrefutable evidence from the audio tape, Eleanor's testimony, and his flight from the scene, an arrest warrant was issued immediately. He was apprehended the next morning while trying to leave the state. The subsequent investigation unraveled the entire story. Arthur Vance, while working as an accountant for one of Thorne's front companies, had been forced into money laundering activities and keeping books for Michael Rafferty, one of Thorne's enforcers. When Rafferty became too greedy and uncontrollable, threatening to expose everything, Thorne decided to eliminate him. Thorne had lured Rafferty to Arthur's house on that fateful night, possibly intending to frame Arthur or force him into deeper complicity. Arthur, knowing he and his family were in danger, had secretly recorded the meeting. When Thorne, or a henchman acting on Thorne's orders, attacked Rafferty, a struggle ensued and Rafferty was killed. Arthur, in panic and fear of implication, possibly coerced by Thorne's threats, concealed Rafferty's body under the floor. The ledger Rafferty was carrying was likely hidden by Arthur, along with it, perhaps with the intention of one day using it against Thorne, or simply out of overwhelming fear. The gun could have belonged to Rafferty or to the attacker sent by Thorne. Arthur's silence for so many years had been a terrible burden, but he probably did it out of fear of Thorne's retaliation against his family, or due to a deep-seated guilt and shame. Elias Thorne was eventually convicted of conspiracy to commit murder, money laundering, and several other charges, receiving a lengthy prison sentence. Arthur Vance's name was cleared of the worst suspicions. He was not a cold-blooded killer, but a victim, a frail man caught in a dangerous world who had tried to protect his family, the only way he could think of in a desperate situation. Eleanor, though heartbroken to learn the truth about the burdens her husband had silently endured, also felt a sense of relief. The dark secret in her home had finally come to light. She had faced the past, confronted danger, and found peace. The house no longer felt heavy with the weight of a buried secret. She decided to have the floor repaired, but kept one of the old wooden planks Rusty had scratched, framing it on the wall as a reminder of truth and courage. Rusty, the orange stray cat, was no longer a stray. He became Eleanor's indispensable companion, a true member of the family. She was grateful for his strange persistence. That seemingly meaningless scratching had been the key to unlocking a forgotten truth, freeing Arthur's spirit, and bringing justice. Eleanor's life in Oak Haven returned to its quiet rhythm, but it was a different kind of quiet. She was stronger, more confident. She had learned that even in the darkest corners of the past, the truth will eventually find its way to the light, sometimes thanks to the most unexpected companions, like an orange stray cat named Rusty. The small town returned to its peaceful existence, but the story of Eleanor Vance and the secret beneath her floor would be told for years to come, a testament to the wonders and surprises that life always holds.